Hello, and thank you to everyone that's coming and slowly trickling in. Thank you for joining the CSPC's virtual community event today as we look at revitalizing downtown spaces in a hybrid work environment. We're letting everyone in and they're slowly still coming in, but I just wanted to let everyone know that our event today will be running for approximately 1 hour, and then it will be ending with an open Q&A session. If you require any tech support, please do send a private message to Colton at CSPC. Currently, they have a CSPC logo and CSPC next to their name. We invite you as well to share any of the Indigenous territories that you're joining from today. If you're unsure of the host nations of your land, you can also visit nativeland.ca for North American Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. We encourage you as well to rename yourself with your first name, preferred pronouns, and your organizational affiliation, if applicable. We request that you keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question during our designated Q&A period. And we encourage you, though, to really use the chat for discussion during the presentation. We'll capture any chat questions as well, and we'll try to get those to our presenters. We require respectful dialogue at this event, and so if your behavior or language is disruptive or harmful, we reserve the right to put you in the waiting room or remove you from the event. So thank you in advance for making this space a thoughtful, constructive, and one that's open for discussion.
We're just going to go ahead here, and we've prepared a presentation for today's event, and Kadani's just loading that up. Okay, here we go. Can everyone see
the screen here, presentation? Amazing. It's always difficult when we can't see the other side of these things. So as the CSPC, we acknowledge that we are located on the Songhees and Esquimalt territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, who have a historical and ongoing relationship to the land where our offices, our work, and our homes are all based on. We also respect the wide diversity of nations and languages across the province, as British Columbia is home to over 200 First Nations communities and approximately 50% of the First Peoples languages in Canada. So a little bit for our agenda today, we're going to be doing a little bit about us at the CSPC and a backgrounder on a little bit of the issues. We're going to be having some guest speaker presentations from our lovely speakers today, and then a community response panel and some dialogue followed by an audience Q&A. So a little bit about the CSPC and who we are. The Community Social Planning Council provides reliable information and engagement processes that inform decision-making across all sectors in order to support broad-based social well-being. Our values are the attainability of a healthy, sustainable, just, and vibrant community, and that accurate and accessible information is a tool for positive social change, that marginalized voices need to be part of the social planning process, and that the necessity of a broad-based process of reconciliation with Indigenous communities as well. This entire thing, though, is being facilitated through our RHAP program, which Aja will be able to speak more to as well.
So part of what we're focusing on with the RHAP project is how housing in our region and concerns regarding affordability affect people across the housing spectrum. And we're working in this project with the municipalities of Colwood, Saanich, and Victoria. Colwood is our lead and host municipality. The project stands for Regional Household Affordability and Prosperity. And that's something that we're very focused on. And we're joining you here today to bring in kind of more of the ways that regional prosperity and economic development are affected. This project focuses on the tools available to municipalities and focusing on how that they can use tools to affect housing affordability.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to today's event and our excellent speakers.
Yeah, and it's very topical, especially with our RHAP project, as COVID-19 has dramatically transformed our city centers. forcing them to adapt, innovate, and reinvent themselves a little bit as well. With more workers being given the option to stay at home, there exists an opportunity for us to reimagine our downtown centers as more than commuter hubs and create more vibrant, human-forward, and inviting areas. Many cities are moving away from the downtowns of yesteryear and are looking to design spaces that are pedestrian-friendly, that are open for tourism and excitement. Cities like Paris, Barcelona, London, and Amsterdam have all been investing in things like wider sidewalks, pedestrian boulevards, expansive public transit networks, and other measures to prioritize downtowns as people-forward places. Other Canadian cities like Toronto and Montreal have been making great strides in creating more lively and enjoyable outdoor experiences through outdoor dining, street festivals, and increased pedestrian-focused areas. A shifting downtown presents the opportunity to rethink the types of business that are present in our core, as the space that was once held for offices and institutions to support them. They could be encouraged to pivot towards more locally owned businesses or focus on creating spaces that support community-based organizations and social enterprises. So today, to talk about this downtown revitalization, we have some amazing guest speakers with us today. We have Penny Gerstein, who's the professor at the School of Community and Regional Planning at UBC. Karen Chappell, who's the director of the School of Cities and professor in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto, as well as Jennifer Barrett, who's going to be the managing director, who is the managing director of Programs, Planning and Policy at the Canadian Urban Institute. Unfortunately, John J. Kiru could not join us today. And responding to our wonderful guests today, we have a community panel filled with our wonderful community experts who know downtown like the back of their hands. Calen McNeil, owner of Big Wheel Burger, Thomas Guerrero, a local writer, photographer, and downtown sidewalker and blogger, as well as Shane DeBro, owner of Habit Coffee in Sherwood. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for the day, who's going to be Penny Gerstein. So Penny is, as I said, a professor and immediate past director of the School of Community and Regional Planning at the Center for Human Settlements at UBC. She specializes in the socio-cultural aspects of community planning with a particular emphasis on those who are the most marginalized in planning processes. So I'd like to invite Penny to take the floor for us now.
And I think you're muted currently.
Yeah, just a little mute.
Of course, yes. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And also I'd like to acknowledge that I'm now Professor Emeritus. What I was asked to comment on is how cities can respond to changing needs of downtown, particularly in terms of sustainability, affordability, and equity. As everybody knows, COVID-19 pandemic has magnified inequities between people, with the health, social, and economic consequences largely resting on the most vulnerable and least able to bear it. And this is sort of really played out in community after community. And it is, sorry. And it's also played out in the physical places where people are congregating. And as the pandemic lingers, so I'm not actually saying it's over, because we sort of know it's not over. It also has had dire consequences of the places most impacted. Downtown city centers in Canada have been hit hardest, with the loss in office workers working remotely, students attending classes remotely, people avoiding crowds to shop and go to entertainment venues, and tourism declining. And so this is really, creating a cascade of impacts, with small businesses losing their customer base, transit uses declining, and commercial real estate tax assessments shrinking. So what we have is a real, confluence of issues, which have been combined with trends that have already been occurring as downtowns for decades were facing competition from other activity centers, especially suburban locations where population growth is occurring. So the major trends that are impacting downtowns, and some of that have already been mentioned, is the shift to remote work. And this was occurring. People seem to like this, but what happened with the COVID is literally overnight. The majority of office workers were working from home. It became very, very common, and people realized they actually liked it. It allowed them a better work-life balance. Allowed them more flexibility about when they can work, and it allowed them to be able to handle all of the other responsibilities they have, such as taking care of their family and households. And so it's been there's been real reluctance for office workers to want to go back to offices, which they find sterile. They're often they don't have ventilation, so they're closed the window. They don't have outside ventilation, and they're usually given that people have to usually commute far to work, is that they feel it's a wasted time and expense for them to be commuting. And so you're seeing this now. I mean, one of the as we know, there might be a major public service strike looming, and one of the issues that they're trying to negotiate is sort of better remote work sort of conditions and everything, and being able to do that. Whereas the government, the federal government, wants remote office workers to come back to work, but there's real resistance, and that's occurring in all sectors. There's also been a real increase in e-commerce, and then again, and that was a trend that was occurring before COVID, but now it's just become so normalized. I mean, that in residential streets, I mean, there's always delivery vans around, and this is sort of common, and people find this very much more convenient than having to go into the downtown core to find parking or have to take transit to go to stores for it. There's been a decrease in travel and tourism. That's actually, maybe that's, given I've recently traveled and the airports seem to be really, really busy. But I do think people are really more cautious about it, and there's been some real disasters in terms of traveling, especially by air, in terms of long delays and plane cancellations and everything. So it's making people really think about whether they really want to go to certain locales to visit. There's been a shift in culture and entertainment. I mean, again, that was occurring before COVID, but it's really been amplified in that we're now, we really reluctant. We really think about whether we want to go down to see a movie in a cinema, or wait until it's out in one of the streaming services. Or do we want to go out for dinner or just have it delivered in? There's increase in housing costs, pushing people further from the downtown core, and that's been happening, really, for decades now. And so the real population growth is not happening in cities anymore. It's usually in suburban communities, which makes the downtown less inviting for people to go in and to go down. And there's an increase in people experiencing homelessness. And this is really, I mean, you probably have all heard about what's happening in Vancouver, where people have been living on Hastings Street, which is a major artery, for about over a year or more, a year and a half. And finally, the police came and evicted them, but they don't really have anywhere to go. So there's just a real crisis going on in terms of people experiencing homelessness. And it is impacting downtowns. People are afraid to go downtown, and I mean all those other consequences. But then, you know, where is the people experiencing homelessness going to live? I mean, you know, so it's an issue that's really not resolved. So as I've described, Canada is really facing, Canadian cities are increasingly facing challenges in the coming years, which will become, you know, more complex over time. And ways of thinking about downtowns will need to change to address these challenges. And so I'm just offering some suggestions, and I'd really love to be hearing others. Because I think, you know, we need to have some robust discussions about this, because we've always had, I mean, this is, I think, one thing that Canada has been very proud of, is that we've had very vital downtown cores, as opposed to, say, the American cities where they've lost, you know, there has been much more flight to the suburbs. I mean, we've always felt the downtown cores has been vital. So first, I think, you know, and this is because I'm a housing person, a housing researcher, is we really need to implement a housing strategy to provide low to moderate income rental housing throughout the city, but I think in the downtown core would also help revitalize so it's a purpose-built rental housing to revitalize downtowns. We need to implement a mixed-use strategy that encourages commercial, residential, social, cultural, and educational uses within easy walking distance. You know, I've noticed in Winnipeg, they've the iconic Hudson Bay has now been taken over by First Nations, who are going to be turning that into a social cultural hub and housing. And I think those kinds of models need to be looked at, and how do you sort of revitalize through you know, really thinking about how mixed use can be done effectively. We need to think about reuse of existing buildings, which is also that example I used, to new uses, including social and affordable housing. We need to develop a downtown revitalization strategy that is premised on greener and more pedestrian-oriented spaces, so not so much dependent on the automobile. And we need to develop strategies to encourage high-value job opportunities. So much of the jobs that are created, besides the office jobs and created in downtown, are service workers and relatively low-paid service workers, and they actually can't live in the downtown. So they're living in the outlying suburbs and having to, you know, commute long distances. So, you know, we need to think about an overall housing strategy. I mean, overall economic strategy. And we need to strengthen cooperation between the public, private, nonprofit, and educational sectors. So, you know, one of the things that I think has made the downtown, say in Vancouver and in other places as well, you know, quite vital, is that, for example, the major universities and other educational institutions have been located there, and with you know, public uses, private sector uses, but also nonprofit uses. I think we could be coming up with some really interesting solutions. We need to give cities more autonomy over their budgets to ensure support for sectors that are sustainable in the long term. And that's sort of one thing that's been a long time thing that I've sort of advocated and others have advocated for, is that municipalities really are quite limited, and given that they're creatures of the provinces. But I think you know, municipalities need to be able to have some kind of autonomy and be able to using their budgets in a more effective way. And we need to encourage return to the downtown core by public transit and active transit. So, you know, cities need to think about strategies that will encourage that. So those are just some ideas I have, and I'd love to engage others with further discussion. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those words, Penny. There are definitely things that we will be discussing in the community response panel as well. And I'm sure that everyone here will have some questions for you as well on how we can achieve some of those very, very good points and goals that you've set out for downtowns. Speaking next will be Karen Chappell. Karen is the director of the School of Cities and professor in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto. Chappell studies inequalities in the planning, development, and governance of cities and regions throughout the Americas. Recently, Chappell launched downtownrecovery.com to track pandemic recovery patterns in North American downtowns. She holds a BA in Urban Studies from Columbia, a Master of Planning from the Pratt Institute, and a PhD from UC Berkeley. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Karen Chappell to speak for us.
Okay, thanks so much, and thanks for the invitation, and great to follow Penny, hard act to follow. One of my classmates at UC Berkeley many years ago. So I do want to draw your attention to this website, downtownrecovery.com, where we post downtown comeback patterns for North American cities. Unfortunately, Victoria is not on our list. You're a little bit too small, sorry. But it does tell us a lot about Canadian cities relative to the US, and we've also done some analysis, which I'll talk about on what matters in how cities are bouncing back. So there's tremendous variation in how downtowns are bouncing back across North America, from about 135% in Salt Lake City, which is doing better than anywhere else, to the low of 30% in where? San Francisco. So San Francisco has really bottomed out. So when we looked at this data, oh, and by the way, I should have mentioned, I am here in Toronto on the land occupied by the Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Seneca, the Anishinaabe peoples. So this is where I'm speaking from. San Francisco, on the unceded territory of the Ohlone people, is really struggling, and indeed, actually, a number of cities along in the West Coast and East Coast are struggling. In our analysis, we found that there's 4 types of downtown comebacks. Okay, there's the ones that bounce back, and that's the Salt Lake City, the San Diego, even New York City bounce back to a certain extent. Then there's the ones that are flatlining, like San Francisco, which is the same as it was 3 years ago, right after the lockdown was announced, and also Cleveland is another one in that category. And then there's the ones that are stuck, and this includes almost all of the Canadian cities, which have come back they're at about a range of 40% of pre-pandemic activity to 60%. And they're going up, but they're going up at about 10% per year. So that, Toronto will be really lucky if it hits 70% of pre-pandemic by the end of 2023. Vancouver would have to be really lucky to even hit 65%, I think. The comeback has been really slow. Now there's a 4th type of downtown. It's almost cheating to mention this, but there is the surge back city, and that's in Europe. And we have a page on our website at Downtown Recovery where we track European cities. And we show you that Barcelona, Berlin, Paris, Madrid, the number of European cities are doing really well. In fact, the only European city that isn't doing very well is London, and that's because it's more of a financial district. What these other cities got right is that they're 24/7 places, and they're centers. They're not commercial downtowns. They're cultural downtowns. They're based on the historical center, and they rely very heavily on tourism. So they have really surged back. And I think I bring it up because I think it's a model for North America to follow as we rethink our downtowns. And some of the ideas Penny brought in about walkability and so forth are really reminiscent of these great European centers. Now, in our analysis, we look at the causes of the what's driving the comeback. Why are some cities coming back and others not? And we find really 3 major factors. The first is the composition of the economy. So if you're relying too much on IT, if you're relying on a professional service economy, you have a lot of lawyers and accountants, you're not doing too well, because those folks don't need to be together to work and to be productive. And even the IT folks, they've settled on a hybrid schedule, which is just a couple days a week. And if your economy is really not very sexy at all, then you're doing really well. The strongest comeback in Canada is in London, Ontario, which has the least sexy economy of any town I can think of. It has healthcare and administration and education downtown. That's about it, and that's why it's come back. So the economy matters. Number 2 is the commute time. And long commutes are discouraging folks. And so the cities in Canada with the worst commutes are the ones that are slowest to come back. The third factor is long-term impacts of the lockdowns. So, we thought, well, lockdowns are over. We did them the last one was really Omicron, beginning of 2022, but there are lingering impacts of those lockdowns. And one is on consumer confidence. So we got out of the habit of, going to the Raptors game in person. We don't do that anymore. We've changed our habits, or we've lost confidence. We had too many cancellations of events, and we've changed our consumption patterns. So there's these long-term impacts, and that's what's hitting Canadian cities really in particular. This is why Canadian cities are doing so much worse than south of the border. A lot of times reporters ask me about crime and say, isn't it the crime rates that are, preventing the comeback? It's completely not true. So it's more complicated than that. And you can see, just if you look at the numbers, New York is coming back, Baltimore is coming back, places that you would associate with higher crime rates are coming back. Another factor that matters is housing. So those cities that were lucky enough to open up housing during the beginning of the pandemic, they're seeing a lot of foot traffic now because of the new residential population. So that's one potential panacea. Okay, so looking forward, what do we want to do? So I think it's really imperative that policymakers realize how important this is. And, I think the real estate industry knows, but they haven't really come to terms with it. Rents have been very, very sticky. Rents have not come down very much at all. A lot of developers have been in wait and see mode, landlords too. They have been very slow to take action, and mayors too have been saying, well, they'll come back eventually. Let's just give them a free lunch. And the employees will come back. And it's really not that simple. So we need to really understand and make sure everybody understands what an imperative it is to save our downtowns. And there's many different things we need to think about. There are the fiscal impacts, the property tax revenue, of course. There's the spiraling impact on transit systems as people had used them to go downtown a lot. But there's also things like all those low-wage jobs that were downtown. Think about all the janitors that were servicing all the buildings that no longer have as much work. There's a knock-on effect on low-wage jobs downtown. There's also a human capital effect on young people who are no longer working in person. They're going to their first job and they're working at home for it. That's going to have a long-term effect on human capital development and skill levels in the workforce. So these are very, very real impacts, and they're also very real opportunities as we look at converting our downtowns to do more green building, to retrofit for energy efficiency and so forth. There's all sorts of things that all sorts of opportunities that are going to open up. So 4 things I think we should do, and then I'll wrap up. First of all, I think we need to look sector by sector on what to do downtown. So we need to look, we need to think very carefully about, for instance, if education and healthcare are bringing workers back downtown, then let's populate our space with those types of sectors. Let's think about what will bring people back 24/7. So let's think about restaurants and small businesses and entertainment businesses and tourism as a potential for the next generation of downtowns. So we need to be really strategic about those economic sectors. Number two, we need to look really carefully at who is actually not coming back. Who is it that is it really trying to work at home? And one example that I see all the time in my work is the young parents. It's those with young kids. And I remember, it actually wasn't that long ago for me, that life is so complicated when you have to pick up kids and cart them around everywhere. And so that thought of going into work and complicating that even more is really making people resist coming back to work. So, so we need to be thinking about things like, how do we get daycare downtown? How do we make it super easy for parents to go to work? So that's number two. Number three is we are going to need to convert some buildings, and Jen is about to talk to us about that with the fabulous study that the Canadian Urban Institute did. So we're gonna need to convert buildings, but we also don't want to be short-sighted about it. We want to make sure that we have flexible building types downtown. If we convert all our office space, we won't have it anymore. We've already seen this with our industrial space. We've converted so much industrial space. It's really hard for us to have makers and have small manufacturers anymore. Very low vacancy rates in industrial space, but we need those flexible buildings. So let's be thoughtful about what we convert and what we don't, which Jen will tell you how to do. And then finally, I think we need to look on a very micro level at downtowns, because some places have come back, some blocks are back, some are not. And we really need to intervene and at that micro scale to kind of save those businesses and establishments that are kind of stuck in these dead areas of downtown. So that's a full-time employment plan for planners going forward to help figure that out. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Jen.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Karen. A lot of great points to take away on how we can really look towards revitalizing our downtown centers as well. And it's a great segue that you gave in to our third and final presenter today. So Jennifer leads CUI's Applied Solutions Lab, which undertakes research, engagement, partnerships, and creative problem solving to shape public policy, implement best practices, and help public and private sector leaders build capacity and identify solutions. She served as a municipal representative for the Federal Homelessness Partnering Strategy and the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention, and as a participating member of the Canadian Institute of Planners' New Urban Agenda Committee. So without further ado, again, I am going to bring Jennifer up onto our virtual stage.
Hello, thanks everyone. Great to be here. I'm going to share some slides with you, which highlights the work that we've been doing on office conversion. So thank you to Penny and Karen for those great opening notes and conversations and lots of good ideas. I'm going to focus really specifically on the work that CUI just released, although it's part of a bigger effort that CUI has been involved in really since early 2020 to really think about the impacts of COVID on our downtowns and what we've seen in terms of the acceleration of trends that were already there and what we now know 3 years in about how this could permanently or at least temporarily alter our downtowns. So a week ago, CUI released a report called The Case for Conversions, which is really looking at the opportunity for the conversion of office space to residential. So our focus was on housing, although we've seen a lot of successful examples of vertical mixed use where you have some office space retained, where you have perhaps an institutional presence as well. So there's certainly a lot of flexibility there for adaptive reuse, not exclusively for housing. So this builds on some work that CUI did in early 2021. We released a report called The Case for the Core, which used a method of strategic foresight to think about what downtowns were experiencing and what the trajectory might be for each of them. And we really came up with 3 potential scenarios for downtown. The disinvestment and abandonment that we were seeing after the lockdown, some of which have even preceded COVID. The second was cities that were seeing escalated unsustainability and unaffordability. where downtowns were becoming more single use and they were becoming also less affordable and more exclusive. And then the third potential scenario was a more hopeful scenario, which is the one that we're really anchoring our work on. And that is that this provides an opportunity for us to really rethink our downtowns, that returning to the scenario we had in late 2019 is perhaps not the best solution. And this is really a chance to reimagine what we see for our downtowns and neighborhoods. So our project looked at 6 different cities, including Victoria, and we chose these cities based on a variety of factors. We wanted economic and geographic diversity, we wanted size diversity, and we also looked at a number of data points, cities with vacancy rates that were higher than 10% for office space, which is seen as being sort of the threshold of a healthy market, as well as cities that were seeing an acute need for housing. So those cities that were seeing rental vacancy rates, for example, around 1%, an extremely tight rental market and an escalation of housing prices because of it. And we started with desk research and identifying best practice and looking for case examples in each of these cities, which we identified. And then we moved into really creating a number of tools that could be used for an evaluation of office conversions. We have anchored our work in 4 different evaluation criteria or a framework. That is the building assets themselves. So what are the characteristics of the buildings that lend themselves to conversion, as well as really thinking about what the asset is. As Karen previously mentioned, there are of course fiscal impacts of a conversion, not only to the building owner themselves, but also to the city that sees more revenue from commercial tax rates than they do from residential. The policy context is important. We saw more success in cities that had very permissive policies, which allowed for a conversion of a building without going through a land use change or without going through a lot of policy changes. Technical considerations included a lot of the details of the buildings themselves, things like adaptable systems that could be reoriented for residential use, elements of the buildings like operable windows or the ability to install them. And then there are equity and environmental goals, the first of which being the embodied energy in the buildings themselves. So we did some analysis that shows that it would take a new building, even a very efficient building, between 15 and 60 years to realize the embodied energy that would be lost by demolishing existing buildings. And then there's also the fact that many of these buildings are old and not as efficient as a new building, and a retrofit would improve the performance of them. And then the equity piece is really about building in some affordable housing, building in diversity within our communities and our downtown so that we're seeing more variety of uses and less of those exclusive single-use places. There, of course, are also barriers to office conversion. And I won't go through all of these, but you can anticipate what some of them are. We have building owners that have only ever overseen the management of office space. This would be a new business model for them. We have the complexity of certain building types that are more difficult to convert than others. And then we have things like cumbersome policy or even the application of building codes that are really not written to consider a new use for an existing building. They're really written around the regulation of new construction. And through this work, we early on enabled what we call 4 enabling conditions. So these are the things that need to be present in order to allow a conversion to happen. And in the cities we looked at, most or all of these conditions were in place. So you need a certain number of buildings that can lend themselves to conversion. And we worked with Gensler Associates, who had put together a way of modeling buildings to be able to rank them and get a score of compatibility for feasibility for conversion. The location of the building is important, not only that it be close to amenities that would serve residents, but also that it be far from incompatible uses. A policy and regulatory environment is important to allow for permissive policies that allow for quick adaptation and adaptive reuse. And then, of course, the financial and market conditions are important. Using modeling, we came up with 5 different building types that we found were consistently true in the cities that we looked at. So you have a number of mid-century buildings, what are typically referred to as brutalist buildings. Those are the sort of concrete buildings built in the middle of the century, very modern, austere structures. And these were largely ranked high because many of these buildings are reaching obsolescence. They're Class B or Class C office space, and therefore they lend themselves to a new use and are frequently the ones that are seeing vacancy. We saw examples of and modeling that revealed that some steel buildings are possible for conversion. They create more complexity in terms of the type of facade, but they have, of course, a large floor area and a lot of floors that allow for a kind of economy of scale. In the cities we looked at, because we had some mid-size and smaller cities, we saw many low-rise buildings that had either undergone conversion or were available for conversion. Heritage buildings, of course, were another one. We've seen a lot of heritage buildings converted. These were buildings that were built to have operable windows and to use to maximize natural light. And so therefore they lend themselves to having the qualities you need for residential. And then we have a number of buildings we called a challenging typology. These are ones that have unusual floor plates that are not impossible, but are more difficult than some of the other ones. We did a full policy analysis in which we looked at the policies that could either help or inhibit building conversions, with a focus not only on what would make permissive policies that would allow for office to be converted to residential space, but also to address some of the concerns that Karen raised around making sure that we don't overcorrect. So we don't want to go to a point in which we have so much space converted that there is no we've lost office space, particularly affordable office space. And so an office policy which puts some guardrails on and protects against the over correction or the over adapter for use of office space is also important. And then things like building code are also instrumental based on the way in which they are applied to allow conversion to happen. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the analysis we used to evaluate market conditions. And then I'll show you just some examples that we found in the city of Victoria and some of our overall findings. So we use this kind of quadrant analysis based on an axis of office vacancy and housing demand. And you'll see that really where we see the highest opportunity, of course, is where there's high office vacancy and high housing demand. You see Victoria is the one city that falls into the low to medium opportunity, and that is really because it has a lower vacancy rate than some of the other cities. However, there are still opportunities because you do see the existence of buildings that have some vacancy, and of course you see the need for housing in Victoria with a very tight housing market. This is just a snapshot of the cities that we looked at and the number of case examples that have been completed in the last 5 to 6 years in the darker blue bars. And then the lighter blue bars suggesting the number of buildings that we identified as feasible within each of these cities. And you can see for Victoria, we have one case study that's currently underway and 3 buildings that were identified in the downtown that had the feasible conditions to allow for conversion. This is just a bit more detail that shows you the kind of types of buildings that were identified in Victoria. We had 2 low-rise mid-century buildings and 1 heritage. Important to point out that both heritage buildings are often designated properties, so demolishing them is not an option, and therefore the adaptive reuse of a heritage building is important. They also have nice qualities that lend themselves towards residential use. And so overall, our total building potential was 3 that were modeled and then 2 more that were identified by stakeholders for a total of 5. Conversion potential of between 200 and 300 square feet and unit potential of just under 400 units. I have an asterisk there that points to the fact that if you were to convert enough space to create almost 400 units, you would shrink the market to such an extent that you would have a limited amount of office space. And so that's where either additional vacancy would be needed or additional office space would need to be available in order to make that a viable option. And then I wanted to show you our key findings at a higher scale. So with the 6 cities we looked at, we found an opportunity for about 30 buildings and 3 million square feet of space, upwards of 4,000 to 8,000 units when you also include other buildings that were identified by stakeholders. And predominant building types were both heritage and mid-century buildings. If we look then at 5 of the larger cities that weren't included in the case studies, so if we add Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal, we see another 100 buildings and another 8 million square feet, and that brings our unit count total to about plus or minus 20,000 units. It's also important to note that in many cases, the conversion of a building is quicker than new development. So this would be bringing new units to market in a way that could expedite housing more quickly than new development. And then I won't spend a lot of time in this because I've I've given you an overview of the kinds of buildings, only just to say that at a high level, we found that between 10 and 20% of all of the commercial buildings in a downtown were viable for conversion. So that allows you to do sort of a quick back of the envelope calculation for any city to evaluate what the potential is. Karen referred to this, but the notion that a number of our buildings are becoming obsolescent or weren't built for flexibility to begin. So it's really an opportunity for us to think about both how we convert buildings as well as how we build them from the outset so that there is the potential for new uses. And then also to note that even in market conditions that it could be particularly challenging, where there isn't high office vacancy or there isn't high housing demand, that policy can still make a difference in creating an opportunity, a very targeted opportunity for the conversion of office space to certain residential needs. And finally, a chance for us to rethink how we plan and build our cities. I think it's telling that European cities are bouncing back more quickly than North American cities. You know, many of them were built before the advent of the car. They did not go through the kind of suburbanization that North American cities did. And I think it's really sort of an opportunity for us to stop and think about how we create downtowns where people want to be. That not only do you go there for office work, but that they're dynamic and resilient and collaborative places that people want to live, work, and play. And so I'll end there and open it up for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, amazing. And so just before that, Jennifer, there were some questions in the chat actually, wondering if you knew the name of the completed conversion project in Victoria.
Yeah, absolutely. I can look it up. I think I know the address, but I want to just check it.
Of course. Amazing. And so with that, that concludes our speakers for this afternoon. And so we move into the community response panel side of things. I will start spotlighting everyone as well, but on our community response panel joining us again, we have Calen McNeil of Big Will Burger, Shane DeVroe of Habit and Sherwood, and Thomas Guerrero, a local photographer, blogger, and kind of someone who's really trying to make a difference on social media in Victoria in terms of highlighting some of the needs that we may have in our downtown centers. So I'm going to add some spotlights here for everybody. Perfect. And so if you'd like Thomas, Calen and Shane, if you'd like to give like a brief 30-second intro just on who you might be as well and your connection to downtown Victoria.
Who goes first?
You do.
Yeah, I go first. Oh, okay.
Perfect.
I'm Calen McNeil, co-owner of Big Will Burger and Zambri's downtown. We're basically a burger joint, but we've been operating in downtown for about 24 years in total. We also have a community foundation through our Big Will Burger. So we provide funding for food sustainability, food banking, homelessness. We also provide basic income grants for people that have fallen through the cracks. Also involved in and started FED, which is Fed Urban Agriculture, which focuses on education, plant starts, urban agriculture, which I think is probably a component of vitalizing downtown and making it making some of those commercial spaces repurposed, perhaps, and rooftops. And we're also involved, as Shane is as well, with the Bread and Butter Collective, which is a group of privately owned hospitality businesses that are working together to kind of bounce back and fix some cracks in the hospitality industry, which obviously deals with typically lower wage earners, first jobs. We'd like to make it careers for people, but a lot of them live and work downtown. So we're very interested in revitalizing downtown. Yeah, and again, just want to reiterate that businesses downtown want to be part of the solution. I think there's a lack of understanding of the willingness of this. And I think with government as well, municipal government kind of needs to get out of their way a little bit. We have to rethink how we do things. And we need to improve communication on that so that the community understands what the ultimate end goal is, because there's a tremendous amount of resistance for some of these changes, which I think are necessary and lack the view of the big picture of what people are trying to do. So better communication too.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Move over to Shane. Do you want to give us a quick intro, Shane?
Hi, yeah, Shane Devereaux, Habit Coffee for 17 years with 2 locations downtown and Sherwood, which I'm sitting outside of for the last 5 years. Yeah, I've been working downtown since the mid 90s. So I've seen the city evolve and change. I'm still really bullish and confident on our downtown, but yeah, this is an important conversation. My hat typically sits a bit more in the cycling advocacy and mobility realm. I just got back from 2 weeks in the Netherlands, did a course in Rotterdam, and explored their 4 major cities by bike. And yeah, it's alive and well. And it really points to some of the big changes and thought processes we need to make, not just locally, I think across the political spectrum, and as individuals. Things have to be reimagined, and we need to look long term. There's some, some scary futures ahead of us if we don't make some radical change. So I think it's an exciting time to be part of that conversation. So yeah, it's nice to be here.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Shane. And last but not least, Thomas.
Thanks, Guillermo. So I'm Thomas Guerrero. I'm the writer behind Sidewalking Victoria, which is a blog that I've been writing since 2015. I've been lucky to live in and around downtown Victoria since the mid 90s, and just somebody that really truly appreciates sort of that pedestrian environment that we have. And looking at things on my blog, I've just recently actually just finished a 3-part series on our downtown and some of the challenges I think we're facing as we come out of the pandemic, and just so happy to be listening to these great speakers today and happy to be part of this response.
Amazing. Thank you so much. As we are running slightly over schedule, I will hold my questions and I will actually turn it to the audience so that whoever is on their lunch break and joining us today will be able to get their questions in and heard. So there actually was a question from City Councillor from City of Victoria, Dave Thompson, wondering, saying that they've heard that the pendulum may soon swing back to more work in office in order to boost productivity. What are your thoughts, anyone from the panel, on where we think that pendulum may swing?
I can jump in here first, and so yes, the pendulum is swinging, and we don't quite know where it's going to land. And so there are what we've heard is that we have employers, large employers, cracking down now. But we've also heard that crackdowns haven't been very successful. So you have, major banks saying you must come in 5 days, and then they have a lot of people threatening to quit, and then so they're back to you must come in for 2 or maybe 3 days. So at the same time, there are certain sectors where you're seeing a reversal to coming back in person all the time. And so it's really sector by sector, and it has a lot to do with the size of your firm and the values that your employees have and the very nature of the work and so forth. So I think the best bet is that it's going to vary a lot across sectors, and it's going to come out at an average of around 25%. At home, work at home, so 75% of what it was pre-pandemic. That's sort of where you're seeing the labor economists landing these days, and it seems reasonable to me that we will have that change of that scale.
Yeah,
I just want to jump in just quickly and just say that for the city, I think that's a really important point that Karen's making, that it's dangerous for us to sit in a place where we're making assumptions that people will come back, and that we should be planning, to move forward based on the worst case scenario and diversifying our economy so that we can, take those actions now, because hoping that people come back is not going to be a solution if they don't.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it a worst case scenario that that people are not coming back. So I mean, I think that I agree with Karen, but I think that one other aspect of it is where employees have more employees have more sort of ability to negotiate. And I mean, I think that's happened right now. There's this fight in the tech sector in San Francisco, sort of led by Elon Musk, who said, you know, everybody has to come back. And then they all said, well, we're going to quit. And so, you know, if there is mobility and flexibility in that workforce to move on, then they would prefer to be having the flexibility of being able to define their own work, their workspace and where they do it. So.
Thank you so much for those responses, thoughtful and insightful. Another question that we have is coming in from Diane Flood, who asks that as a long-term downtown resident, they'd like to raise the issue of public amenities needed to attract and keep folks living downtown. We have a deficit of parks, green spaces, and affordable recreation facilities. How do we ensure that these come with new housing? And for this, I'm actually going to add on some of the Victoria City Councillors, Jeremy Cardona coming in here, and Dave Thompson as well, as they may have some more insights as well into how we can get more amenities downtown.
Jeremy, you probably have more to say about this than I do, but I saw you were on mute, so I got my hand up first. I guess it's an obligation, to me, it's an obligation of the city to provide trees, green space, and parks, especially in underserved areas and areas of high population density and growth. And I think that we are heading towards that. It's also great if developments can provide a bit of that, but it's usually small pieces that the individual developments are able to provide. But the city and city council are moving towards accelerating the provision of parks in downtown. And Jeremy, this is where I'll lean on you for the details. You're
sure.
Involved.
Hi, everybody. I wasn't expecting to speak on this panel. Thanks for having me. I'll just say briefly, I know it's sort of hard to keep up with everything that City Council is doing, but this Thursday, we're actually voting on our park sequencing plan, which is a plan that was brought forward by McNeil, who's somewhere, I think, in this meeting as well. And knock on wood that passes. It passed committee of the whole, but it's a whopper of a policy because it essentially lays out our priorities for the next 10 years around parks and what's going to happen first, second, third, and where those investments are going to be made. And downtown is very well, to my mind, very well represented. So some of the highlights from the park sequencing plan include an immediate update, major overhaul of Centennial Square, which we're hoping to start this year, which would see a splash pad put in there and a cafe kiosk situation with patio seating and probably be multi-phase, but we're really excited about that. That's actually at the very top of the list up there with Crystal Pool. Then we've committed to creating a new downtown allotment garden of some sort, maybe on the top of a parkade, maybe somewhere else. But that is something that we've committed to. I think it's actually a short-term. Dave, is that a short-term commitment? I can't remember. I think it's short-term.
Great.
Then Ship Point is a little bit further down the list. We all were a little bit ignorant about how much that's going to cost. So it's probably not going to happen right away, but Ship Point is going to be just massively transformational. And then a lot of other things that we're doing to add more amenities and events. So we put aside, I think, $640,000 this year for festivals and events downtown. And also the extension of pay parking and increasing the cost of pay parking, which I get not everybody's like super jazzed about. The media sort of missed the ball on that one because the whole point of us extending pay parking was actually to create this downtown investment fund where we're going to have direct investment in what's going on at the street level, everything from cleaning facades to stringing up lights and beautification and actually improving our amenities. So it's not just like some kind of money grab. It's actually meant to like pump resources and investment into downtown, which we think really needs it, in addition to some of the policing decisions that we've made. And maybe the last thing I'll mention, also on the park sequencing plan, we've committed to building a new pier in downtown Victoria on the side of the old Johnson Street Bridge, right next to, immediately south of the current Johnson Street Bridge. Certain people want to see a Ferris wheel on that pier, and food trucks and carnival games and things that'll be family friendly. So landing the plane here on this, the idea is that we believe collectively as a council, we need pretty serious public side investment in our downtown core. Obviously, we have complex issues down here, but one of the things that we need to do is make sure there's a high degree of livability for the people who live down here. And we also want to do more to attract residents downtown, because I have 12 and 14-year-old daughters. We don't hang out downtown that much, frankly, because there's just not that much for us to do with a 12-year-old. If there was carnival games and a Ferris wheel, we'd come down once a month. And we have some other things that are in the hopper too, which we can't get into yet and share, but I would say it's probably the top priority of this council is to invest in and revive our downtown in a really holistic way. So I'll leave it there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I see that Jennifer's hand is up. Just before we get to that, I just want to say that the time currently is 1:02 p.m. So we may be approaching the end of the lunch hour for a lot of people for this lunch and learn. If folks need to hop off, I do want to say now and thank you guys all for coming out this afternoon and sharing in this amazing lunch and learn with these amazing speakers. You can stay up to date for any CSPC events at our website, communitycouncil.ca, and also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. If our speakers here are okay to continue for another 10 minutes or so to just get through the rest of the questions, that would be perfect. But I just wanted to give the space for those that need to exit now their opportunity to do so. Amazing. And so now I will turn it over to Jennifer.
Yeah, there was just a comment in the chat that was similar to what I was going to say, is that obviously in downtowns, there isn't a lot of empty space to be reused in large parcels. But I'm always amazed when I walk around, even the densest cities like Toronto and New York City, of all of the small parcels, right-of-ways, kind of liminal spaces that are underutilized. And I think a lot of the programs that were put in place during COVID really helped to reveal spaces that could be converted to being more people friendly, rather than either being just completely empty spaces that weren't being used at all, or spaces for parking, that sort of thing. So, hopefully a lot of those initiatives will continue, whether it's the reuse of an empty parking lot or sidewalk space, et cetera. I guess a few other trends that we've seen is buildings, like with the conversion of office space, buildings providing their own amenity space. I realize that's not public space, but certainly it's been a lot of rooftop spaces created, activating the ground floor buildings that were once empty lobbies now have recreation space, they have co-working spaces, those types of things. And then also to really think about the movement around placemaking and how you can activate downtowns, in some cases with very few initiatives, to make them places that people want to be, whether through programming and events or through more permanent installation of spaces with park benches and reusing, even in some cases, just empty park space with grass that could have programming for children, for example.
Yeah, and just on that, before going over to Calen's raised hand, I wanted to say that as you were talking about office space conversions and adaptive reuse, and as you're mentioning now with other uses for office space, Calen was speaking also about urban gardens and urban farming, and food security, especially in urban centers, is becoming ever important. Do you think that for buildings that could be considered unconvertible for housing, do we see the opportunity for vertical urban farming in unused office spaces in downtown cores?
Yeah, it's certainly an idea that's been thrown around. I mean, we know that interior gardening and growth has happened on rooftops as well as in interior spaces. So I think that's certainly an option to be explored further. And, in Canada, it's different. I lived in Ottawa, but in Victoria, you have the benefit of milder weather than we do. But certainly, if we have thousands of square feet of office space that's underutilized, there's an opportunity to create more recreational space and indoor spaces that would be used year round.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jennifer. And I'll turn it over to Calen's raised hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment and thank the Victoria City Council for pushing these things forward. I do think that having done development permit stuff in the past, there needs to be sort of rigorous follow-up with any new developments that have a requirement or pledged a requirement to do some of these, even though they're small, they do make a big difference I know just in the pathways on Yates Street where Zambries is, there was these breezeways that were closed the entire pandemic. You know, these may seem like small things, but it makes the flow of community very well and or very positive experience. And even a small little park, any of that makes a difference in downtown, just more green space. I know, you know, through our community foundation, we've sponsored the Fernwood, I think it's what's the name of it? Sorry. The Red Fern Park in Fernwood, which is a great initiative. I was down there. It's such a good space. They've got pollinator gardens. There's going to be bees down there. They're going to have game space for people to sit and enjoy the outdoors. And this is, you know, I think part of it was funded by some government contributions, but most of the money, half the money at least, is being raised by the community, which I think is an important aspect. But having the city's involvement and also letting people know, we've got on Cook Street, at our Cook Street location, we developed the boulevard about 7 or 8 years ago with a $5,000 grant from the city. But a lot of people don't know about these types of programs, and the city isn't promoting it. So, or, you know, they've got a lot of stuff going on, but I think that kind of communication can help. I know there's other businesses on the Cook Street Village area that want to do the same thing as what we're doing. So I think there is an abundance of opportunity, and just getting everybody kind of focused on these things. And again, communicating so that people know, because there is private sector funds that will help move this forward.
I'll just maybe jump in on that briefly and say that thanks for that, Calen. And I mean, one of the things that we've seen over the last 3 years is that there hasn't been that much built in terms of stratified, partly because of the pandemic and partly because, honestly, because the inclusionary housing policy that Victoria created kind of killed our condo market. And the
100%, I agree with that too.
Positive corollary was that we built a bunch of purpose-built rental, but we still need condos too. And so for those who don't know, when you build purpose-built rental, that is considered the amenity, right? But when you build condos, there's some money that flows to the community. And so I think it's on the docket to review the inclusionary housing policy, because we do need to get back to building some condos. You know, we can't just have only purpose-built rental, we need both. And so then it's up to us to figure out what those community amenity contributions might look like. I think Red Fern is a good example. I think that's coming from Arise, right?
It's Arise and the Bigwell Community Foundation. We partnered to form the Good City Project, which is going to fund that type of amenity, but also we did a daycare that needed to be refurbished involving with the Aboriginal center in downtown. So there's a number of projects that will help fund. Yeah, but it's going to be a cooperation with everybody, both federal, provincial, city, and then the community as well. So there is the good things happening. Yeah, we just need to grease the wheels.
Grease the big wheels, perhaps.
Grease the big wheels. I'm always plugging.
As a final question here, which I'm going to branch off of through Jordan Royer's question as well, talking about animating some areas of downtown. Coming from the city of Toronto, which is known as a concrete jungle, but is actually filled with lots of parkettes and parklets. Do we see the city of Victoria taking a stance on creating smaller pocket parks and smaller kind of pocket areas to help animate some of these areas a little bit as well? And how, and in addition to that, if there are any of our academics in the room as well, is there value as well in creating these smaller pocket pieces instead of kind of thinking about a grand kind of master plan for a larger park? Is there value as well in creating these smaller pocket areas?
Dave Thompson, you want to answer that?
Well, I can jump in and just say, I mean, from a urban exploration perspective, having those little places, those small little gems that you can find as you work your way through a city is really what makes a great urban space. So, I mean, obviously large parks are important, but having those little places where you can sit down, have a coffee, meet with a friend, anywhere you walk around in a city is truly invaluable, especially for people that are living downtown.
Yeah, a friend of mine last year told me that what he found traveling around different cities that he loved was you need the 3 Ds, which is density, diversity, and delight. And the delight part is when you're exploring and you find a new space. And we've got some beautiful little spaces like this downtown. We could definitely use some more. That's the kind of thing that excites tourists and gets people coming downtown, whether they're local residents or from out of town.
And I would just jump in and add that for me, the really important thing is that there's something that activates small spaces so that it doesn't just become a spot where people go and party. I mean, to put it bluntly, like there has to be things that actually attract people there, and there's turnover of people, and there's something cool. Ideally, it's family friendly. You know, you go, because otherwise I think it can be poor urban design. Just going back to Jane Jacobs and the work that she wrote in the early 60s about what makes a successful versus an unsuccessful urban park. So I think there's just the sky's the limit on what we can be doing in Victoria to attract people and have fun, cool things to do. I mean, anyone who's spent time in Western and Northern Europe knows that they're so forward thinking on what they do with public space, from light features, interactive art, and all sorts of stuff that's just intriguing. So we need to just do a lot more of that as we contemplate new downtown parks.
Amazing. Thank you so much to everyone that participated today. I do want to close with Diane before. I'm not sure if Diane's still here, but did make a comment, which I think rings true to this idea of creating space downtown, especially creating spaces for residents. Saying that with so many of us living in high-rise silos, it's harder to build community than where folks have front porches. So I think that's something that we should all be thinking about when we're talking about how to design these spaces, as it is true that it is a little bit more difficult to design community in a space like downtown, but not impossible. And I have a lot of faith in the city of Victoria and all the surrounding municipalities and councils that will be able to make downtown Victoria and the surrounding region a very vibrant, pedestrian-focused environment. So again, thank you so much for everyone for coming out today. We hope to see you all at our next event next week, April 25th. We have a Families by Design event that is going to be hosted locally here on the island. It's actually going to be in Colwood at the Gorge Pavilion.
In Esquimalt.
Esquimalt, sorry, at the Gorge Pavilion. So sorry. So yeah, thank you so much to all of our panelists and our community response panel. And we hope that all of our guests today had a great little lunch and learn with us this Tuesday afternoon.